right, hi everyone. We are here live in San Francisco at RSA conference. I'm with Grant Geyer, Chief Product Officer at Clarity.
Thank you,
Good
Mike.
to see you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, another RSA. I don't know how many this is for you. It's far too many for me.
I can't count. I have to start pawing the ground with my hooves.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the research report that went out today. A lot of interesting data. I guess kind of the overarching theme of the whole thing is that like traditional vulnerability management it doesn't work in today's connected environments, especially around cyber physical systems. Just take me through kind of that theme, just why it doesn't work.
You know, the reality, Mike, is that it never worked. We just didn't know that it never worked. And if you think about the whole approach of common vulnerability scoring system, it dates back to 1999, and it's based upon the severity of the vulnerability. And what you find is that there's 250,000 vulnerabilities in the National Vulnerability Database. But if you look at which one of those actually became exploit over time, it's about 30% of it, which means that if you focus your strategy on only patching critical vulnerabilities, it's an enormous mountain that you're never going to dig out of, and B, you're not going to get to a lot of the exploits or vulnerabilities that actually are exploited by ransomware and hackers today. And we can talk in a second about even some data that we looked at looking at that data. We also looked at it in terms of cyber physical systems, which had some interesting insights.
Yeah. All right, so before we get into the data, though, what do you think is a better approach beyond just kind of like that critical CSS?
So there's been a few things that have proposed over the year. This is like candidly my personal learning journey, and the frustration of like saying that how do we build solutions that really work? We started off with CVSS. A few years ago, first, the Forum of Incident Responders and Security Teams introduced a new concept known as EPSS, and that stands for Exploit Predictability Scoring System. It's a mouthful, but what that means is they did a whole bunch of data science work to say which vulnerabilities are likely to become the next exploited ones in the next 30 days. And their methodology actually yielded the fact that you could apply a lot smaller effort and get a lot more vulnerabilities patched that became exploits as a result. So that was kind of the one important thing. The second is that CISA, about 2 years ago, released the KEV database. It's not Kevin, it's known exploited vulnerabilities, which basically says which are the ones that are actually getting exploited in the wild. That's another technique, and the advice from the US government is, look, if you have to do anything, start with the KEVs first. So that was where the industry took us until about 9 months ago, we started working on this concept, which is around something called exposure management.
So that's a great point, because we're talking now more about insecure internet connectivity, in addition to a KEV, in addition to vulnerabilities that are in the environment, and you're working from a giant number of vulnerabilities and kind of paring it down to something that's more manageable.
Right, and so the problem is, I think, that much more pronounced in cyber physical systems, like in industrial environments and healthcare environments, because these systems can't be patched frequently. Sometimes the asset is no longer supported by the vendor. Sometimes it just can't be taken offline until there's a change window, which may be 6 months from now. So the problem is that much more pronounced. When we did some analysis of our data, we looked at 20 million assets, and we're able to figure out that with only looking at OT assets and clinical devices, if you follow traditional wisdom of patching critical vulnerabilities, you would have to patch 22% of them, 23% of them. But when you look at not just vulnerabilities, because vulnerabilities don't take into account misconfigurations, default passwords, clear text communication, a lot of other risks other than vulnerabilities, when you take those into account, what you wind up finding is that if you focus on that narrow set of category of high-risk assets with KEVs directly connected to the internet, you only need to focus on about 1.6% of that total pool. Here's the kicker, that if you focus on patching critical vulnerabilities, you would wind up missing almost 40%, 38% of the high-risk assets. So enormous amount of effort to patch all the critical assets, and you miss almost half of the connected medical devices and OT assets that could be exploited today by
That's the real eye-opener report where, I mean, we're calling it blind spot. That's exactly what it is. It's just all of this exposure that just doesn't fall under that umbrella of the 9.0 CVSS score.
That's right. And I think that the good news is CVSS is so ingrained as a way of thinking that it's been very effective at cataloging and providing a standard metering stick for how to classify vulnerabilities. But what got us here isn't going to be what gets us there in this new dangerous world where what happens to a cyber-physical system could impact patient safety or could impact safety in a plant. And we need to recalibrate and come up with new methodologies based upon this new world that we live in.
It's really exciting. This is kind of what we've been talking about for 20 years, is getting to this point where we can really prioritize what matters in the environment. It seems to be a pretty viable approach.
And I think that the key is that if you focus on a lot of common sense rules, like what are the end-of-life devices connected to the internet? What are the assets that, like connected medical devices on legacy Windows systems directly connected? You could focus on a unique set of things that you don't have to stare down the barrel at a mountain of vulnerabilities. You can say, these are the things I need to do today, and then these are the things I need to do tomorrow. So it's a very approachable, consumable way to provide hygiene into your OT or healthcare environment.
All right, Grant, thanks so much for joining me. Exciting stuff.
Thanks for having me.